Good morning and welcome to Saga Saturday. We are going to be speaking about the conversion of Scandinavia to Christianity. I am Ula Brenna's daughter, your nerdy Norse host, and I am joined here with Børresen and Kenheld. If you will introduce yourselves, I will share this link out.
I'm Børresen Edvardsson, and I'm very excited to talk about Yule this week.
And I am Dan Kenheld, and I am also really excited to be talking about Yule. And I just, before we get started, this is not actually a Viking-Age headdress. This is the St. Lucia tradition in Scandinavia, is like 18th, 19th century. However, it's fun to wear, and there's fake candles on my head. So,
you can't go wrong with fake candles.
Day, you know, it's like we do the thing. We're doing the thing. It's cool. It's fine. So, Ula is sharing things, so I am going to keep talking, I guess.
Well, we're going to talk about Yule at the time of conversion today. And I think we're going to start with Iceland, right? Or are we going to...
Yeah, I wanted to start with times. The when conversion happened. Okay, I'm done sharing links out now. When conversion happened in different, because it hit Scandinavia in different times. So the first place that, so we generally think of the conversion to Christianity in the year 1000. Part of that is because that is when it was written into law in Iceland. But each of the different countries converted at different times. In Denmark, the first Christian king was Harald Klak. He actually was reigned twice, once from 812 to 814, and then again from 819 to 827. It didn't really take hold until the baptism of Harald Bluetooth around 960. And Harald Bluetooth is the person that erected the Jelling stones and built a church at Jelling. And that's a whole other thing. In Norway, there were several Christian kings that ruled, but it wasn't widespread in the populace until King Olaf Tryggvason in 995. The first king to be baptized in Norway, as opposed to being baptized in England, was Magnus Olavsson, in 1035. And his father, Olav Haraldsson, became Saint Olav, the patron saint of Norway, and is said to have completed the conversion of the country, even though Saint Olav was actually baptized in Europe.
Those two Olavs are the most important conversion figures.
Yes, and there's Olaf and Olav, and yeah,
Olaf Tryggvason and Saint Olav a little bit later.
Yeah, exactly. Damn Norwegians. And in Sweden, the first attempts at conversion, they actually started as early as 830. But even as late as 1110, King Sigurd the Crusader was fighting the locals in Småland to adopt Christianity. So that's 300 years that they were still not doing the thing?
The Swedes converted last.
Yes, they did. And then Iceland, it was written into law in year 1000. We'll talk about that in Njál's Saga. And it was known as Kristintaka. I totally butchered that. It's literally the taking of Christianity, which I love. It's like the Christian night. And I found this, and I don't have a citation for this. I literally got this off of Wikipedia, so take it for what it is. But apparently in 1721, a Danish colony was started in Greenland to convert the inhabitants because Greenland was still pagan, or at least good sections of it were. And I don't know about that. Again, it's a Wikipedia thing, but I'm like, that's awfully damn late.
So 1721, by that point, Scandinavian colonies in Greenland are gone.
Yeah.
And this is the indigenous population. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. But being the indigenous population, that makes more sense. And that's why you don't trust Wikipedia people.
Yeah, straight up religious colonialism.
Yeah. And we got a lot of that. All right. So Iceland.
Yeah, so the conversion of Iceland is probably the most well documented from the people's point of view, the people making the conversion's point of view. Obviously, documentation is coming a little bit after the actual events. So take that in mind, keep that in mind. But there's a couple of sagas that deal specifically with the conversion. Christianization Saga is literally the saga of the Christians, and it deals with sort of their point of view during the conversion process. And there's some really good stories that come out of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the broader themes, and then I'm going to read you guys a couple of chunks from these sagas, actually a couple of chunks from this paper I found by Jenny Joshins on Iceland's conversion through arbitration. So there's a couple of theories about why the Icelanders were so sudden to adopt Christianity, because it really is, the way it's described is a very sudden process. You know, they're kind of debating it a little bit, then they go to the Althing, and at the Althing they're just like, okay, we're Christian, and then you're all supposed to be Christian now. Which, you know, it's a little bit of a squishy process, squishier than they like to imagine it, but that's fine. So one theory that it was easier for them to convert because they already had this exposure to Christianity, which is weird because Denmark is right up there with Francia, like they're right butted up against each other and they're getting exposed to Christianity all the time. So I guess. And then there's this argument that, well, there's a bunch of Celtic people, Irish people mainly, who have been taken to Iceland and they're already Christian. So they're kind of, you know, casting their, and we do see a little bit of that in Lochstela Saga. Melkorka is Irish. But again,
is also in,
say that again?
Sorry, Kjartan is the descendant of Melkorka and is pagan, so
yeah. So, you know, take that or leave it. Another theory, and these theories, by the way, are coming from the paper Shopping for Identities, Norse and Christian in the Viking-Age North Atlantic by Orri Vesteinsson. So, say that again?
You say shopping?
Shopping, yes.
Shopping for Identities.
It's actually a really neat kind of way to describe it. And what made me really like just the title is when you talk about, this is not the conversion of Iceland, but this is the conversion later of the Kievan Rus. They literally shopped for religions. He invites, who was it? Vladimir? No. Oh, this is going to bug me. Anyway, so he invites representatives from Roman Catholicism, from Eastern Christianity, from Eastern Orthodoxy, from Byzantium, really, and from Islam. And he sort of says, you know, explain to me your religions, guys. And he picks the one he picks Eastern Orthodoxy because it is the prettiest. And it has all the gold and all the, you know, all the bling, as it were. And he's like, this is, like, if I'm going to convert, like, I want the nicest shit. And this is the nicest stuff. And so he literally just sort of shops for religion. And then that's the one he picks and we all go with it. And then later you have St. Olga, who is, I love St. Olga so much, who later, she's like, no, I'm very Christian. And then I murdered these 3,000 people because they messed with my husband. It's fine. And now she's a saint. So clearly it was fine. Completely off topic.
We'll explore that in a later episode.
We absolutely should. So another theory is that the pagan faith just wasn't that well integrated in Icelandic society because of its important ties to physical location in mainland Scandinavia. Again, I would point to some of the sagas where you have some, like Freyr-Gothi, right? Like it is very incorporated in these people's lives. So, but, you know, these are specific individuals highlighted in the sagas. So maybe for the general population, it maybe wasn't as integrated as it was. Maybe that's what made him so special, is that he was just really dedicated to being a religious figure. Which I guess in that saga, he also sort of later goes on to be not very religious.
Right. I personally don't think he converted to Christianity, although some people say he did because he simply says he's giving up the worship of like Frey and the old gods. But like, it doesn't, usually they're very explicit in the sagas, like, and then I took up the better religion. And he doesn't. He's just like, I'm done with this. So in a way, he becomes kind of like a-religious. And I wouldn't say atheist. He's like a-religious. Like, gods have scorned me and I am scorning them back.
Which is, you know, it's a point of view. It's cool. Like, do your thing, dude. So another theory says that the colonists converted, but only sort of. And that's going to be my argument, is that they did convert legally, but then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the exceptions that they granted themselves, which are pretty big exceptions.
Some pretty big exceptions, yeah.
And then the last one is that Christianity provided this unifying identity for the people of Iceland. So you had a bunch of, you know, they don't have like a king, they don't have they have this very, very egalitarian society in many ways. So you do have rank, right? Like you have the Gothi and you have slaves, and like there's ranks in society, but there's no king, right? Like there's no inherited leader, I guess. Well, no, that's not true, because I think the Gothis are inherited, but
but there's no king, and there's no standing army, there's no you know, guard or any other sort of policing force going around. Like there's nothing.
But this provides that sort of unifying, like we're and a way to say we're so much better.
It's a bettering.
We're so much better than the mainland because we adopted Christianity and we did it. We're not these people from the boonies. We're not backwards. We are on the forefront of, you know, cultural change, and we're moving with the times, and, you know, F you, Norway.
It was all so very politically motivated. It had way more to do with the politics than with religion. It's so politically motivated.
So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to read you a little bit from this article, because I think it's fascinating. So this is at the point in the conversion where you're starting to see these two political parties, well, multiple political parties, but two main factions, right? You've got the pro-Christian faction and the anti-Christian faction. So you've got some of the Gothar are joining the Christian faction by outright conversion, and they're just saying, okay, baptize me, I'll be Christian, I'm joining this political faction. And we've talked about Snorri, the Gothi, previously, and he doesn't go with it, right? He's moderate, but he sticks with the paganism. So he's still got a lot of political influence. So he's floating around out there. And so this was just a really fun chunk, right? So however, other Gothar may have converted. The Christianization Saga reports that in the middle of the deliberations, a person came running and announced that a glowing lava flow was headed towards the farm at Thoroddr Ivinderson, a Gothi. Taking the story at face value, we can conclude that it is authentic since the reaction of the pagans. No wonder the gods are angry at such talks. So basically, like, we're having these discussions, they're mad at us, they're going to burn my farm down with lava. Okay, but also Iceland spits up lava on the regular. So, you know, maybe you guys, a little natural history could have saved you some trouble, I don't know. And he suggests that the attitude of moderation, a significant factor, followed. Sorry, I skipped a chunk. So Snorri Gothi's caustic response to the pagan concern: what caused the gods' anger when the lava burned the ground on which we are now standing? So I guess there was some, he's like, well, there's always lava.
There is always lava.
You know, it is what it is. So they get to this thing, they've argued back and forward, and they get to the all thing. And at the all thing, Orri is the author. Orri goes on to relate the famous story of how Thorgir went to his tent. So Thorgir is the guy, he's pagan, he's the law speaker, but they entrust, because of his absolute standing in the society, they entrusted Thorgir to make the decision. Do we accept, or do we say, no, we're going to stick with the way things have always gone? So he goes on to relate, Thorgir goes into his tent and lays down under his blanket for 24 hours without speaking, and then summon the people to the Law Rock the next day. So first off, I think we now can all say we've experienced those days where you just want to lay under your blanket for 24 hours and have a think. And you don't want to talk, like in the last year, I think we've all probably had that day where we're like,
blanket fort day.
Peace out, society. Like, I'm going to go lay down, I'm going to have a little think, and I'm not getting out of this bed. So I guess what I'm saying there is, Thorgir, I relate.
I feel you, man. I feel you.
So he lays down, he summons people to the Law Rock. That morning, probably June 24th, Thorgir gave an impressive and effective speech to which Orri devotes 15 lines, 10 conveyed in indirect and 5 indirect speech. In the first part, he deplored what he saw as the result of the current situation, when people would not share the same law. He feared that it would lead to conflict, which in turn might destroy the country, and he illustrated the problem with examples from Norway and Denmark. Changing to direct speech, Orri has Thorgir make the following statement. Now this seems to me the best advice, that we do not let those decide who are most eager to go against each other, but rather let us so arbitrate the case between them, that each side will win a part of the case, and let us have one law and one religion. Otherwise, it will become true that we will tear ourselves asunder and we'll all go different, we'll also tear apart the peace. So here he's saying, look, guys, we can't have civil war. We can't have internal conflict. We're all stuck on this island together. It's going to get dark and wintry. If things go bad, they will go very, very bad. Yeah. So we need to pick. We will have one law and one religion. And in the end, the religion that they pick is Christianity. So the last thing I'll read to you guys is a little bit about the exceptions, and then my personal favorite part of this whole story. Not the laying under the blanket. It gets better. So they debate this, they come to Christianity, and they say, okay, we're going to accept this one law. Thorgir, however, makes sure that there are some outs. So Thorgir then announced, thereby making it law, that all men should become Christian, and that those who are still unbaptized in this country should accept baptism. But concerning the exposure of infants and the eating of horse meat, the old law shall remain. So you can still leave your babies on a mountainside and be Christian. You can still eat horses. Totally cool. And you can still eat horses, which, you know, like, there are religious components to eating horses, but also solid protein source on an island where things go wrong frequently. So, you know.
See aforementioned lava.
Exactly. People could sacrifice in secret, but if witnesses were present, they would incur lesser outlawry of 3 years. So you can keep the old religion, you just can't keep the old religion and have a party at the same time. Right. You know, so they go ahead, they accept this, and everyone agrees. And as later authors included the logical consequences of the general exception of Thorgir's speech by acceptance of Thorgir's speech by including that people were baptized the day that they were leaving the Althing, but they chose the hot springs nearby because they would not enter the cold water of Lake Thingvellir, which is just the most peak moment of this whole story to me. Like,
right?
Yeah, we're gonna change our religions. We're gonna
but we're doing it our way.
Overhaul society, but we're gonna overhaul society from the hot tub.
because we're Scandinavian and that's what we do.
Right? It's just like, I love you guys. I love you all so much. Just we're not giving up our horse meat. We're not giving up the exposing of the babies, because that would be wrong. But you know, we're gonna do this from the hot tub. So anyway, that's my background on Iceland. Bear, do you want to get into Loxdale Saga?
Sure. And I'm trying to think about it. This is it starts pre-conversion, and then it straddles the conversion. It
straddles the conversion. And that's what I found interesting about this one, is that there were references to both Christ, not Christmas, but references to both Christ and Christian men, and to Yule and Yuletide. So
like the beginning, if I interpret the sort of the course of events correctly, and it's been a little while since I've read Laxdæla Saga from beginning to end, but I reread this section, and basically we're looking at Iceland pre-conversion, Kjartan and Voli. And Kjartan, by the way, that name is based on Mir Kjartan, which was an Irish king who is his grandfather, Melkorka's father. Irish, but Kjartan is super pagan, super Norse pagan. He is born and raised in Iceland, and he and Voli, who's his foster brother, and they're both like really, like, you know, they're the best of men, and Voli's just like slightly less the best of men than Kjartan. They decide to do the proper Viking thing, test their mettle, go out sailing. Kjartan leaves his sweetheart Gudrun behind. This will cause problems later when Voli comes back and marries her.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
And they go off to Iceland, or rather, they go off to Norway. And while they're there, they make a name for themselves. The whole crew, including Kjartan, Voli, and Hallfreðr Otterson, who will come back in our discussions. Hallfreður Vanræðaskald. And Kjartan sees some guys swimming in the river. They're like, let's go out for a swim. And he sees somebody swimming really, really well. And he's like, oh my God, Bully, you should go challenge that guy to a swimming competition. And Bully says, I don't know who that is. I'm not going to do that. And Kjartan's like, oh, you coward, I'll go do it. And he runs out. And basically he jumps in the water. He swings out to this guy and just pulls him under the water. And so apparently this competition, this swimming competition, is not like a race. This is how long can you wrestle underwater without having to come up and take a breath. And so they try, and like the other person has to come up. Okay. And then they go down again, and then Kjartan has to come up first.
It's like the most Norse thing ever.
Right, and they're going down, and they're like trying to drown each other basically. And then finally both of them come up at the same time. So total deadlock, totally equals. And they come to the shore, and they're getting dressed again. And they're talking, and the guy Kjartan has challenged is like, well, who are you? Where are you from? What's going on? Kjartan answers, and this guy's like, don't you want to ask me who I am and where I'm from? And Kjartan's like, I don't really care who you are. And he's like, you're talking to the king, because I'm the king of Norway. And he's like, oh, and just turns around and starts walking away without even putting on his outer cloak. And so the king stops him and says, like, you can't go back to your men without something nice to wear, and takes his own cloak off, his fine cloak, and gives it to Kjartan. And Kjartan comes back and shows his men. He's like, hey, look what I just got from the king. And they're all like, dude, you just accepted a gift from the king that's this nice. Now you're in his debt, right? And you know, we talked about this whole gift exchange thing. A gift is not just a gift. It isn't given without the expect of something in return. And usually with king's gifts, that return is service. And so like, this isn't just like, hey, you owe the king, but like, hey, you probably have to like stick around and like do things for the king now. And this kind of comes into play because as things progress, they find out, okay, well, the king has, which king is this? This is Olaf, right? Yeah. This is Olaf, Saint Olaf? It's Olaf Tryggvason.
Which is not Saint, it's Olav Haraldsson that becomes Saint Olav.
Right, so this is Olaf Tryggvason, the first one.
The first one.
And he was known, and that makes sense, because he's known as the more violent converter. You can think of the two Olafs as, so Olaf Tryggvason is like convert or die, and Saint Olaf is a little bit later and is like, convert please.
Right.
But there's still a little convert or die going on there too, but just less. It's more convert or have very bad political consequences.
Yeah.
But here it's Olaf, gives a big speech to a whole bunch of people, and a bunch of pagans of Nidaros were like, we're gonna fight you. And the king's like, you're a bunch of farmers. You know that I can defeat you. And so then like they all convert like on the spot. And so you're seeing all these different instances in which like King Olaf is like speaking very well. And converting people en masse, sometimes converting people through threats. And Kjartan talks to his men, and also there's a bunch of spies that are constantly hanging around the Icelanders who can go back and tell the king everything that they talk about. So any conversation that I say that Kjartan and Bully were having, the king knows. And so Kjartan and Bully, like at one point Kjartan's like, let's just, like, I don't want to convert to Christianity. He's bothering me about this. He's asked me too many times. And I don't like how he's been forcing people through threats to convert. So I don't want to do it. Let's burn him inside his house. And the rest of the men were like, maybe let's not do that. I don't think that's a very good idea. And so he doesn't, and the king confronts him the next day and is like, hey, I heard a little birdie said that you wanted to burn me inside my hall. And he says, yeah, I did say that. He totally fesses up. He's like, you think I'm a coward? No, I'll stand right in front of you. I'm the man who said that. And the king instead decides to give a little speech and let him go and say, like, I will never force you to convert. You're too good of a man. You and your men are too impressive and awesome. You're worth the wait. And go, like, your bravery and your everything you've done here and shown me today have shown me that, you know, you get the choice. And so a year later, when Yule comes around, Kjartan and Bolli and his men still haven't converted, and they watch King Olaf give another speech at the Christmas Mass for a whole bunch of people, and they were really moved by his words, and essentially they decide to convert, and Kjartan and Bolli go get converted the next day, and then Hallfredur is like, no, I want the king to be my personal witness to my baptism, so he has to wait a couple days, which I think is very funny. But he was like, no, I'm special. And then when Kjartan stays in the service of the king for a little while longer, part of that whole gift exchange going back and forth. But Bolli goes back to Iceland, and it's said that when he returns to Iceland, Christianity had already spread and was much more established. I can't, like, I'm trying to. I'll actually just look at the beginning of the book here. If I remember correctly, this actually does straddle the year 1000, and it's supposed to be.
It does. So, excuse me.
Yeah.
They traveled from Iceland to Norway in 996. Spent a couple of years there. I'm not sure just when they went back to Norway, but it's a couple of years later.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump in for 1 second. In the saga, or my version of the saga, my translation of the saga, I've got it that Kjartan and Bolli were baptized, and all of their crew and a multitude of other men as well. This was on the second day of Yule before Holy Service. And then there was the Yule feast. So we have conversion and Yule. I mean, it's the second day of Yule, so we're still in that, the 3 days, the 10 days, whatever we talked about last week. But it's the second day of Yule before Holy Service. I didn't have the time to dig into that, because I wasn't totally sure where I was going with that, but I found that to be an interesting line in the saga, that it references that.
They do actually kind of hone in on, like, the fact that, like, Yule is this time, and that is important by when it says that the king has learned of the discussion between Bolli and Kjartan to convert. The king learned of the discussion. Well, I just said that, huh? And his men, before he had an informant in each one of the heathen men's quarters, he was extremely pleased at the news and said, Kjartan has proved the truth of the saying, festivals are a time of fortune. So it seems that the king believes that it is the time of the year, the celebrations of Yule, that have pushed it over the edge and made this conversion possible.
So my guess, Holy Service, my guess is Mass.
That's my guess as well. I'm sure that that's what it is. But the second day of Yule before Mass, right? So is that, or are we talking like a Christmas Eve Mass? I don't know.
Yeah. So I was doing some quick Googling. Obviously, you've got the hours, right? Like you have the canonical hours, right? So that assumes that you could have Mass any point during the day. The daily Mass now that I'm aware of, I think takes place at noon.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help any. So that would mean you'd have to be up pretty early to get on this conversion train. Which I like to imagine none of these people were like, 7 a.m. guys, let's get rolling.
Let's go convert in that hot tub.
I like that they said that they needed a whole, I'm interested in what's happening with the conversions, because they needed a whole day to get the whole crew. The reason why, after they're having this discussion, they're like, let's not go bother the king right now. He's dining. Although the king did hear about it before dinner was over. let's not go bother the king right now because we're going to need all of tomorrow to convert the whole crew.
Right. So clearly this is a one-on-one individual sort of thing if it takes all day to convert a crew, right?
This is not the super soaker.
Super soaker holy water. Oh my goodness.
Sort of more like a fire hose.
Right? Oh, God.
You're all converted. You get a conversion and you get a conversion.
Oh my goodness. All right. So we
That's
got
like not relaxed style of Saga.
right. So we've got Bully and Kjartan are both converted. They go back to Iceland at different times, a couple years apart, it looks like. And excuse me. So while they were away, Iceland gets more and more Christian.
Yeah.
So
it really doesn't, and I just want to say, like, it really doesn't come up very much after that. Like,
it doesn't.
It's just sort of mentioned every once in a while.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll encounter someone who's not Christian, and that's like noted.
And
but then after that, it's just kind of like, meh.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, okay, we're all Christian now. So Njál's Saga. I'm actually going to just read the short chapter because this is actually the writing of the conversion of Iceland to Christianity. It does not happen during the Yule time. It was at a summer all thing. But here it is. Chapter 101 of Thorgir of Lightwater. At the Althing, both Christians and heathens set up booths. Both groups then went to the Hill of Laws, and each side took witness as the other side declared themselves out of the other's laws. This was then followed by an uproar, and the groups disassembled. So I love that we got your Christians, we got your heathens. I don't have to listen to you, and you don't have to listen to me. We're just gonna do our own thing. So the man the Christians chose as their speaker went to the Norse priest, the Gothi, and paid him 3 marks of silver to say what the laws should be. That was hazardous counsel, as he was a heathen. The Gothi spent the day laying on the ground, covered in a cloak, so that none would speak to him. The following day, they all went back to the Hill of Laws, and the priest said, that the Gothi said, it seems as though our matters were come to a deadlock. If we are not all to have one and the same law, for if there be a sundering of the laws, then there will be a sundering of the peace, and we shall never be able to live in the land. Now I will ask both Christian men and heathen whether they will hold these laws to which I utter. Everyone agreed, and the Gothi took their pledges of such. And he says, this is the beginning of our laws, that all men shall be Christian here in the land and believe in one God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but leave off all idol worship, not expose children to perish, and not eat horseflesh. It shall be outlawry if such things are proved openly against any man, but if these things are done by stealth, then it shall be blameless. Right.
So that's interesting. You've got the Christmas Saga saying we're cool with baby exposure and horseflesh, and you can.
But we have Njál's Saga saying no, you can only do that in private.
Right, and here they're saying you can't do any of these things, and if we find out that you did, that's outlawry.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting,
right?
Okay. But my very favorite part of this is just the phrase, but if these things are done by stealth, then it shall be blameless. Blameless. Like, it's literally, it's fine. It's fine. It's not even bad.
It's not even a thing. If you do it inside your house, it's fine.
Look, it's all good as long as you don't get caught.
Right? Then the rest of this is, but all this heathendom was done away with within a few years' space, so that those things were not allowed to be done either by stealth or openly. Thorgir then uttered the law as to keeping the Lord's Day and feast days, Yuletide and Easter, and all of the greatest high days and holy days. The heathen men thought they had been greatly cheated, but still the true faith was brought into the law, and so all men became Christian here in the land. And done. All right.
The moment of right before the reveal for some reason gives me a very like what's it called, like game show vibe of yes. like do you both contestants, do you agree to whatever I'm about to say? You've already signed the contract,
right?
Are you gonna say yes? Is it a deal? And everyone's like, okay, it's a deal, it's a deal. It's Christianity.
No, right? You're killing me, Børresen. Right? It does almost feel like that. And it's kind of like they flipped a switch, but kind of not really. The switch actually, you know, it was like one of those old, you know, Edison bulb that takes 5 minutes to warm up, right? It took a while to get there. It wasn't just flipping a switch. But yeah, it was interesting that in one saga we have you can still expose your babies and eat horses, but maybe you can't. Or you can do it in private. Or maybe you can't. Like, there's still a little bit of diciness in here. Yeah, and again, that wasn't not at Yuletide, but the other thing that I like is the we're going to keep the Lord's Day and fast days, Yuletide and Easter, and the greatest high days and holy days. So there's still some sprinklings of the old ways, right? And this is the beginning of the fasting before the Yule fasting, because pre-Christianity, there's no references of Yule fasting. It's all just feasting. And then once Christianity hits, you've got your fast and then your feast. So, yeah.
So one thing I just sort of remember this. There's a waterfall in Iceland called Gothafloss. And there's a story. So if you go to Gothafloss, and it's just a really big, cool looking waterfall. The story goes that that's where Thorgir threw his idols into the water after he said, we're going to take Christianity, and he takes his idols and he tosses them in the water. And that's, you know, but we'll note, neither the Christine Saga nor Njál's Saga mentions this. And so the theory is that this is probably a 19th century innovation, and that Gothafloss got its name from something else. And it works out nicely that you could also,
right.
But you can see there's a church in Iceland where they have an Akureyri. The church in Akureyri has a stained glass window that depicts.
Oh, that depicts the throwing of the pagan idols. Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, if you hear that story, probably 19th century fabrication.
Yeah.
As are many fun things, annoyingly.
Indeed. All right. How about that troublesome poet?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the story, and then Børresen's going to talk about his poetry, because
I've done some translations of his poetry. And,
So Halfred the Troll. I was really bummed that I'd kind of forgotten about Halfred. Because he's fun. He's a hoot, right?
Yeah.
So he's this Icelandic guy. He falls in love with this woman, Kolfina. And Kolfina kind of falls for him too, but not really. And she's like, look, I'm kind of sick of you. And so she goes to her dad, and he really wants to marry her. She's like, I'm not feeling it. So she goes to her dad, and her dad gets him sent overseas, so that she doesn't have to worry about him anymore. So he goes overseas. His patron is Hakon Sigurðarson, who is pagan, and he's the opponent of Olaf's attempt to convert Norway. And so Halfred himself at this point is very pagan, right? He's this great poet, and his paganness and his poetry are really tied in together. Like, if you read his poetry, there's a lot of allusions to pagan mythology.
Can I give you one real fast?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for instance, the whole race of men to win Odin's grace has wrought poems. I recall he does a lot of inset lines, so just they're in here. I recall the exquisite works of my forebears, but with sorrow, for well did Vidrir's Odin's power please the poet. Do I conceive hate for the first husband of Frigg, Odin? Now I serve Christ. So there's lots of his poems have tension with Christianity, or are just like, I'm super pagan.
Yeah. So he's in Norway. He hitches a ride at one point with these Icelandic merchants, and he goes off with them, and they hit a storm, and they get turned back. And this is sort of this like, oh, the pagan gods failed us, right? Like, they pray to Thor. Thor does not calm the storm. They get turned back, and then suddenly the ship is in floundering, and out comes this guy to rescue them. And his name, he tells them, is Akerisfraki, which is, I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but it's like anchor strength or anchor something. And it's, yeah, so he's like, and everyone's like, yeah, that's not your real name. And he's like, it's definitely this. It's fine. So they get back, and oh my gosh, it's King Olaf in disguise. And so basically the realization that Olaf was able to save him leads Halfred into the most like romantic, capital R romantic swoon into Christianity of all time. He's just like, oh, clearly the power of Christ is great because you were able to save me from the storm. So like he's had this traumatic event happen to him, and suddenly he's like, yes, I'm going to make big decisions.
I just want to point out that we have yet another example of stellar swimming from King Olaf here.
He is a mighty strong swimmer.
So
Michael Phelps, move over. King Olaf is here.
So he like swoons his way into this conversion, but it's pretty lackluster. So unlike some of the other conversions, unlike Olaf Tryggvason's conversion, he never gets any real pre-conversion education. So he doesn't really know what Christianity is about. He just knows this guy saved him, and he's
doesn't know what he's getting into.
Cool. Like, you want me to be Christian? I will do this. So, and after the conversion, he kind of mostly ignores religion. Like, he's like, man, I'm Christian now. Cool. And he doesn't go to mass, and he doesn't really do anything. He just occasionally makes the sign of the cross over his beer, as one does. Yeah, so Flemus says he's not walking on water. No, but very nearly. Like, there's a little bit of, Christ illusion, right? Like, he has the power to tame the waves. So Olaf has since died. So like Halfred's making the sign of the cross over his beer. He has a dream where King Olaf comes to him and is just like, this is not what I told you to do. So he's like, oh, I need to buck up my Christianity a little bit more. And then he goes back to Iceland, and he runs in, first he marries this woman, Ingebjorg. They have some kids, and then she dies, and he's like, well, there's nothing left for me here in Norway, so I will hie myself back to Iceland. But I don't want to take the kids with me, so kids, go stay with other people. Peace. He leaves, he gets back to Iceland, and he runs into Kolfina again and promptly sleeps with her, which is, very Christian, I guess, of him. But she's married, so he's a widower, so that's fine. She's married, that's less fine.
Less fine.
Her husband, Greece, is like, this is not cool. This is really not cool. So he starts this lawsuit. There's also a bunch of sort of bad poetry that's running around at this point about Greece. So he's insulted. There's some, starts this lawsuit. Olaf gets to the point where he's like, or not Olaf, excuse me, Halfred gets to the point where he's like, we're going to handle this with a duel. We're going to fight this out. And at some point, Halfred has also picked up a bit of a reputation for poking out eyes. So that's floating around here too, just FYI. Which is an interesting, right? Poets, Odin, eyes.
Yes. This poking out of eyes and the kind of poetry that he was writing about this guy, was it Greece, right?
Yeah, Greece.
A lot of the poetry about Greece was from what I remember, it was both need sometimes, getting close to need, which is this kind of libel that is very specific, involving being a passive partner in sex, and so but also smell. He was making fun of how Greece smelled a lot, which I thought was very funny. But there's a connection between need and emasculating people with your words and poking out eyes. It's been sort of debated back and forth about whether or not taking of an eye or blindness is specifically emasculating, because it happens in certain sagas. Like in Egil's saga, there are moments where he pokes out someone's eye and takes their beard off. That happens a lot. Beard cuttings and eye gouging at the same time. And then in occasional instances, it has been actually lumped together also, gouging out the eye and castration. So the idea of like losing an eye, and actually Odin's losing of an eye being related to his knowledge of Seidr, the feminine magic. He's half emasculated and he can step in and out of these two zones. That's a whole another fun gender discussion, but yeah, the poking out of the eyes is a very like, it's super insulting as well as obviously debilitating and painful.
So I didn't know all that, and that's fast, and I love that. Like that is very fascinating. So he picks up this reputation though as an eye poker outer, and like the night of the duel, Olaf again comes to him and he's like, "This isn't very Christian of you. You're not being a good Christian again." So back from the dead, he shows up and he's like, "Naughty, naughty," and so finally, Olaf or Halfred wakes up in the morning, is like, "I'll let this go. It's fine." So and the way he gets out of this is he writes another poem where he's basically just like, "I'm sorry." If I remember correctly, he's like, "My bad." So life goes on. Eventually he dies at sea. And he's, as he's taking his family back to Iceland, and his coffin washes up in Iona, which is a major early Christian site in England. Or is it Scotland? Either way, in the British Isles. Major, I know it's north. I just can't remember how far north. Yeah. I think it's still England.
Or wait, Iona.
It's northeast of the island.
Oh, it's men's basketball. That's not what I wanted. The Iona Gales. Thank you. It's in the Inner Hebrides off the Ross of Mull on the western coast of Scotland.
All right, so there we go. It's in Scotland. So it washes up there. The abbot's servants plunder his remains. And again, Olaf comes back, and he comes instead to the abbot at this point, and he's like, "This guy was a real bad Christian, but he tried. So let's not, he needs Christian burial." And so they end up giving him Christian burial and making altar goods of his treasures, including the gold that he had been given at one point, which is part of this whole fight with Greece, is the gold. So anyway, that's Halfred the Troublesome Poet, he's real hot for the ladies, he's real hot for poetry, and he likes to poke out eyes. That's the takeaways.
The only thing I really can add to Halfred there, honestly, and it doesn't really have anything to do with Christianity or the conversion, but I translated for class a couple of his stanzas, and his stanzas were some of like the hardest to translate that I've ever encountered. He almost always does these inset lines where essentially like he's saying most skaldic poetry in 4 lines, you need to say like a complete thought, like one whole sentence, and in your 8 lines of your full stanza, you need to have like basically one thing that you're talking about, or 2 very, very closely linked ideas. But when they got a little later and a little farther along into things, people would start putting in like asides, almost think of it like a stage aside. I'm speaking over here at the same time, just to kind of like keep going. And so it made it really rough to translate, because there's like sentences are getting broken up and the words aren't in order anyway. And but I actually had to translate his poem twice, because the first time I tried it, it was so hard. But it's about Kolfinna. And so I'll give my, if y'all would like to hear, I'll give my translation, which is very rough, and then I'll read you the Complete Sagas of the Icelanders translation, which is less. And if you really want, I can read it in Old Norse too.
I mean, yes, I always want.
So the Old Norse is Kolfinna leskt kenna, kved en og flut þenna. Hat kveða vifi vitru valde fult af skaldi. En af ungumsfana alfnikjanda þykir. Óð bjarn at greiða, ganga dýrligar angi. So what I got from that was, Kolfinna says she recognizes, yet I perform that thing, what they say to wield the wise wife. Fell from a skald. Yet from the young lady, it seems to the wealth puller, or generous man, I am eager to make poetry, a sweet odor to walk gloriously. Okay, so that's incomprehensible. And honestly, even writing it was incomprehensible. I was like, what on earth is this? The complete Sagas of the Icelanders gives it a little bit easier. Kolfinna said she felt, I make more verse about this matter. They say the sage lady is irked. That foul words come from the poet. So Kolfinna said she felt that foul words come from the poet. But the aside is that I'm gonna keep making poems, but they say that she's pissed. But still, from the young woman, it seems to the wealth strewer, so the generous man, and then he does another aside. I am eager to fashion poetry. That a precious fragrance issues. So even though Kolfinna is a little bit mad that I wrote some mean and nasty poems about Greece, still it seems to me that she's so good smelling. She smells so nice, which is really funny because most of the things he was talking about Greece was how bad he smelled and how he didn't wash himself.
Well, and it's funny because he's like, Kolfinna doesn't like poetry. I'm going to keep writing poetry. Right. I'm definitely going to keep
I'm going to keep going down this rabbit hole because I've already started digging, and I'm just going to keep digging, even though her dad already sent me overseas. Like, you'd think that he'd figure it out, but
I don't think.
Sorry, boys are dumb sometimes.
Truly a troublesome poet.
Yes, he is a troublesome poet, indeed. I love it. Right.
So those are. Oh, go ahead. Go.
No, I was just gonna say where I've lost my track of where we're at in our notes.
Yeah.
So those were the sort of the three saga chunks that we had.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about. I'd done some research on women in the conversion, specifically, kind of how the conversion impacted them.
Yep.
So
big changes to women and property rights and a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
And then I think you had something on symbols.
I do. I've got, so let's do women in the conversion. And we've got 10-ish minutes left. We always run over, whatever.
I'll charge through this. So the article that I found was, I think, titled Women in the Conversion. The Double Impact of Christianization for Women in Old Norse Culture. And it's by Elsie Mundal. Not that helps to flash into the screen, but I'm like, I'm anyway, moving on.
I read it all.
So initially, we've got some legal impacts and some religious impacts. Legal impacts are going to get a little bit also into kind of women's role in the public sphere. So initially, under the conversion, so pre-conversion, divorce existed. There was an equitability between divorce, right? Men could divorce, women could divorce. They both had sort of the right to pursue that. And we see in the sagas, both men and women actively seeking divorce. And so initially the right to divorce sort of persists. But around the 1200s, we see the institutionalization of the sacrament of marriage. So with that sort of that force of it as a sacrament, divorce becomes real tricky. And basically you can't divorce, you can just get an annulment, right? But it's interesting. So this is just a real quick aside. This is one of those moments where it's like, well, like you will hear sometimes in modern political argument that marriage is a sacrament. And so I would like to point out that before 1200,
it literally wasn't.
So it's not like this ancient sacrament, FYI. But that's a modern.
That's a whole other thing that we could go into.
So anyway, there's something to yell at people later. Inheritance. So with divorce, we get into some questions of property ownership and inheritance. So under Old Norse law, inheritance gets really tricky. Mundal argues that women with brothers were generally barred from inheriting parents' property. I am not as familiar with that, but under Christianity, daughters now get some inheritance, though it's half the inheritance of the brothers. And I know less about Scandinavian law, but I know like in England, we have examples of fewer examples of inheritance under the pre-Christian system because we just have fewer examples of history, like documented physical documents. But we do have examples after the conversion of Christianity of not only women inheriting, but women writing wills and passing their belongings on to other women. And there's a great couple of examples where there are actually books that are being passed on. So women own books that's part of their personal property, and they are passing those books on to other women, which does suggest a certain level of women's literacy.
Yeah.
So yeah, go for it.
Just to, because you said you didn't know too much about the pre-Christian, just to elucidate the inheritance. From what I understand, I wouldn't necessarily say like women were, it wasn't like a ban, like you weren't banned from getting your inheritance if you had brothers. It was more like it always goes to men unless there are no men to inherit, in which case there's a legal status that's written into, I believe it was first in Graugos, but it may just be Jarnsida, the later law code, but it's phrased as the daughter takes on the legal role of a son, and takes on the same legal everything, benefits, rights, and responsibilities of a son inheriting if she has no siblings to do that inheritance, or for instance, if the siblings have all been like exiled or something. So it's like it wasn't like women are banned from inheriting. It was more like it was men are the inheritors, and then sometimes women.
Right.
So thank you. So inheritance, we also have joint property. So property under Norse law, you have split ownership. Women get their property, men have their property, and it doesn't become joint spousal property, right? But under Christianity, that property becomes jointly owned, and it's under the control of the husband. So you'll see sometimes that's interpreted as the husband has all the property, he owns all the property, but initially it's supposed to be they own it together and he's just in charge of it. Right. The distinction between these two is pretty fine, but yeah, there it is. Dowries get a little complicated at various points in different medieval law codes. You will see the dowry is solely the property of the woman, and it's sort of to protect her. Other times that dowry gets, whether it's legally protected or not, kind of gets folded into the joint ownership. Right. This especially gets tricky with royal couples. So when the royal princess comes in with her dowry, like suddenly that gets real, because there's often land associated with that, and like these villages or these towns are part of her dowry, and that can get like the ownership of those towns gets tricky.
It gets a little dicey when you're moving princesses around.
Right. So another hallmark of pre-Christian Scandinavia was polygamy. So we know that they practiced polygamy. We don't know necessarily how widespread it was, but it was something you could have multiple wives. And as I understand it, under pre-Christian practice, those wives all of them had legal protection.
Yes.
So they could all divorce. You didn't have necessarily a wife and a bunch of concubines. Under Christianity, you see sort of a technical barring of polygamy, but it continues on. So you've got your legal wife, and then you've got sort of your concubine.
Kind of sub-wives, sort of, yeah.
In English sources, these are often referred to as Danish wives. So English references to Scandinavians who come to England in the early medieval period, and often kings, like the king. I think Canute at one point gets accused of this, or Hartha Canute, one of the two of them. Like he has his Danish wives as well, and so they have this very like snooty attitude toward it, which is mirrored by the legal attitude. So women, your official wife had legal protections. Your concubines did not. So one of the rituals of Christianity at this period is the churching. So after you give birth, you are unclean. You're sort of ritually unclean, and you have to be brought back to the church and made ritually clean again. So wives got brought back to the church in full ceremony. They got the whole the good treatment. They became ritually clean again. they were celebrated. You've come through this dangerous experience, giving birth, and we welcome you back, and you are now a full member of the community again. Concubines did not. Concubines, after they give birth, were giving birth under the church's view to bastards.
Right.
The children were unclean, the woman was unclean, the guy,
yeah, welcome to
not so much unclean. Like, he doesn't get the same punishment, right? So it's these concubines and their children who are bearing the brunt of the uncleanness.
I have opinions on that.
Right? Like, that kind of sucks a lot, and it's not great. So what's interesting though is there are persistent some persistent legal protections of women. And then when we look at some pre-Christian stuff, so the discussion of women in pre-Christian Scandinavia often focuses on women in Iceland, because I think largely the Icelandic family sagas give us sort of a view into lives that we don't have necessarily from mainland Scandinavia. But there are some really interesting views into women's lives that can be gleaned from the legal codes. And we have, for example, Norwegian law, the Gutelingslov, which sorry, Norwegians, I just butchered that, that women do have some legal roles in society. So Børresen was talking earlier about women being able to inherit legal position if they had no brothers. So here we have examples under the Gutelingslov. Women could act as witnesses. Say that again?
Gulatingslov.
Okay,
Yeah,
Gulatingslov.
Ting is the thing there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Gulating, I see it. Yep.
Gulatingslov.
Gulatingslov. Okay, under these Norwegian laws, under these Norwegian laws, women could act as witnesses and could swear oaths, which does place them in full legal ownership of themselves, right? Yeah. So we see there's some great examples from later medieval England where women come and they want to make a lawsuit, which early sort of high medieval English law, full of lawsuits. Henry II was like, let us get into lawsuits. And he went nuts because every time somebody brought a lawsuit, they had to pay the king for the privilege. And he was all about that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That sounds like Plantagenet.
Yeah. He was just like, give me the money. So anyway, so we've got these examples, but it's the women have to bring the law under their male relatives' purview because they don't have full status under the law. Here we have women, they can swear oaths, they can act as witnesses, they are full humans under the law. Widows especially have this sort of special status because they can act in place of their dead husbands at the ting. So they can travel to the ting and act in the place of the husband. They could also account for the legal implications of the felony. If she's acting as a witness, she can account for the legal implications of the felony that she witnessed. So that sort of implies a knowledge of the law, which is more than just like, oh, you can pretend to be your dead husband because he's dead and we need a body, right? This is, you need to know sufficient to be able to act fully in this capacity, which means, she's got to have that knowledge at some point, right? Like now she's not only a warm body at the ting, she's a warm body who's participating and is wholly there.
Is invested in it and respected in that regard. Yeah.
Right. And then the last thing was kind of my favorite. Oh, sorry, Børresen, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, and like we know that you didn't like necessarily need to be anything more than not even a warm body, just a body.
A body.
We talked about this a few weeks ago, they put a dead body on trial. So the fact that you're participating is actually still remarkable. It isn't just like, oh, well, of course you would have to participate. You're in court. No, you could be dead.
So the last one is kind of my favorite, that a widow of a man who's been murdered, it was her duty to convene a ting at the site of the killing, and then she got to decide if the sentence was passed there and then. Mm-hmm. So if they came to a sentence, she got to be the one to say, which is a lot to put on a woman whose husband's just been murdered, kind of depending on the relationship between the two. So, right. Like if the reason her husband's dead, if she had some hand in that, she might be like, it's cool. We're good. It's fine. But
Yeah.
anyway, so that's I thought that was really cool.
It is really cool, and I've got to say, given this situation and the level of autonomousness and ownership, if I were a widow, I would not be remarrying. Like, why would you remarry at that point?
That is actually a question I was going to have for Kinnahild in your research. So I know that in Graugos, you can, if you have been divorced or widowed, you, like, the woman can choose who she marries at that point. Whereas upon your first marriage, you always have to get permission from your father or your brother, or whoever's
Right.
in charge. Mm-hmm. But once you've been married, once you are free, you are emancipated in the current legal framework, right? So now you can make your own decisions, and so people can ask to marry you, and you can just straight up say no. Oftentimes, women would still do the cultural practice of, like, thank you for asking, I find this amenable, and I'm going to go get permission from my father anyway. Right. I still think this is a good idea, but I'd like to get my father's permission, because
as opposed to needing father's permission.
Did you? I would assume that this power went away with Christianity. Is that what you found, or do you know anything about that?
So I didn't really look into that. I got really excited basically about these Gulden laws and
fair enough
where I got focused. But I do know eventually. I think that it remained true that once you were widowed, especially your marriage. So once divorce becomes persona non grata, right, you kind of revert to your father's household or your siblings. But if you were widowed, the ownership had passed to your spouse. And I think under property law, like if you have grown children, your grown sons, have control over your property and theoretically control over your future marriage. But if you so really, like, your peak moment is you want to make sure your husband dies while your children are still before
ding,
the age
ding,
of
ding,
majority.
right there.
Right, because if your children are under the age of majority, you have control over the property. You have control over.
There's like a sweet spot in there that.
Right. So I'm not saying murder your husband, but just make sure that he dies peacefully in his sleep before they turn however old.
Not to always bring Saga Saga back into it, but it's the Bully Bullison sweet spot. Mm-hmm. Of right before they're 12 years old, so that you can then display their father's bloody murder cloak to them, tell them to go avenge his death.
Alrighty then.
So all this, really quickly, all this marriage talk made me think, this is not Norse at all, but Roman. So, and this is all sort of my memory, so I'm going to mess this up somehow. But there was under classical Roman law, there was two forms of marriage. And one of them was sort of, you had like the easy form and the complicated form. And the easy form, you basically never left your father's protection. You were sort of loaned out to your husband. And if your husband died or if the marriage ended, you reverted back. But it was
I don't like that plan.
Like it was easier to achieve. I think you didn't have to be you had to be a free citizen, but you didn't have to be patrician class. Mm-hmm. It didn't cost as much, all this kind of stuff. Like, so that was, most marriages took that form.
In a sense, I would think that there's some level of protection depending on who your father is, in that, like, if your husband ends up being like awful, right, he can just literally recall you back.
And I think that kind of marriage could end in divorce. So you could divorce it and go back. The other sort of complicated marriage, if your husband died in that marriage, that was the only way that a woman could achieve like full citizen status.
Right.
Was because she had officially left the possession of her father and passed into the possession of her husband, and now her husband's dead. So assuming you didn't have any adult sons, you were free and clear. And so you had that option, or you could become a Vestal Virgin. That was your other great option. That was, by the way, if anyone's curious, Vestal Virgin is the option that I personally would pick, because you know, you get armed guards, you get the respect of the Senate. Sounds like a good time.
All you have to do is keep a fire going.
Right?
Whatever.
I could
whatever.
do that all the time, every night.
You know, so religion, that's a nice lead into religious impacts. Under Christianity, obviously we see a significant change in women's religious lives, right? So pre-Christianity, you had the vulva, you had the Goodyear. That sounds like a tire company.
Yeah.
Can you say it, Børresen?
Oh, Goodyear?
Goodyear.
Okay. Still sounds like a tire company.
Yep.
So these are active roles that women could take in Old Norse religion, right? So it's the Goodyear are a priestess kind of,
go thee light kind of.
right? Yeah, and then the vulva are these the prophetesses, the Spakona, that kind of stuff. Børresen, it looks like you're going to correct me there. What are we
No. I'm trying to figure out. I've never encountered this word Goodyear before, and it looks like it's the plural. And I'm trying to figure out what the singular would look like. I think just like Gidya.
Gudya.
But it's got an ER, which is a little weird for name.
I think Gudya is right. I think that's what I've...
Yeah, I would say Gudya sounds right.
I've mostly pronounced it as Githa.
Good. Oh, is it an ed? Here,
Is it a thorn?
Okay, I keep talking and I'll figure this out.
I think it is an... No, see here she writes it Gydjer. And maybe the singular is Gydjene. Anyway, so you had these two roles were active roles that women could take in Old Norse religion. Under Christianity, really the only active role that women could take was being a nun, which is not a very active role at this point. So we do have some examples of early medieval nuns going off doing badass shit. Hildegard von Bingen is a great example. Go for it.
I've got it. Okay, so I had a feeling, I had a suspicion that the GYD, the Gud there, is God, right?
Yeah.
Good, right? And I still think I'm correct because Githya, Gyedja, means goddess or priestess, according to Zoega.
Right.
There's literally no other information, so that's where that was from.
Makes sense.
So obviously they've lost their prominent role in the religious sphere, and then Christianity brings this religious uncleanness concept, which I think there is a concept of religious or sort of sacramental uncleanness in Old Norse religion as well. Like there are things that are sacramentally unclean, feces,
right.
You know, that kind of stuff.
You got to keep certain.
There's always, I mean, and part of it is just basic hygiene and hygienics. Is there's always some sort of unclean, do not touch, non-kosher sort of thing, in pretty much every religion. And it really, I mean, it boils down to you don't poop where you eat. But
what there isn't is this notion that some people by nature of their birth are religiously unclean.
Exactly.
Which Christianity does introduce, where women by nature of being born a woman are religiously unclean. And we get into all of like menstruation and all that.
Totally different conception of gender. And
exactly. The women in the church is a whole other thing that we just that's right.
That we don't have time.
It's a hot mess.
That's a hot mess we don't have time for. If you wrapped up? I want to talk about symbols really quick. Or Børresen, did you have something?
No, I was pointing upwards at you, and I realized actually on my screen you're above me, and I have no idea if on anyone else's screen you're.
Yes, that is the way it actually. The rest it is for the rest of the world. Yeah. Okay, so symbols. And this actually, I got a private message after last week's show about symbols, and I'd thought about it a little bit, and then it kind of made me dig in a little bit more. And I'm sorry, I cannot remember who it was that asked me about that. But anyway, the two most common symbols of Norse religion and of Christianity are the Thor's hammer and Mjolnir and the crosses. So a couple of things to note. So Norse raiders, traders, anybody that left left Scandinavia and went over to the European side, they brought crosses back. There's evidence of crosses coming back to Scandinavia as early as the 6th century. Whether that was because of religious connotations or they just liked it, who knows? But there are crosses in archaeological finds as early as the 6th century. To date, 50 miniature crosses of silver and 400 of iron have survived from the Viking Age. Don't quote me on those numbers. That's just what I found in something this morning. There are multiple instances of graves that have both crosses and hammers. So a female grave near Hedeby was found with a cross pendant around her neck, but the wagon that she was buried in was decorated with hammers. A soapstone mold found in Jutland, which is actually the cover photo for this event, has both a hammer and a cross, so you could mold both of them at the same time. And some graves in Sweden, Finland, and Russia contain both crosses and hammers on the body as pendants. So they're wearing both at the same time. And that seemed to be in a span. There was a several 100-year span, even that, depending on where you were in the Scandinavian countries and how far into the conversion you were. There was definitely instances. It was not the flip a switch, right? Because honestly, my opinion, the more God, if you're already from a multi-God, polytheistic, thank you, I missed some letters in there, a polytheistic culture, what's one more God in the mix, right? Bring it on. And it wasn't until, it took some time to really kind of weed out the pagans and everybody is really the one true God. And I found that really interesting because somebody did ask me, well, what about the symbols? And now I really actually want to dig in deeper and see where else there were both crosses and hammers. I'm sure that there's actually quite a lot of archaeological evidence for that now somebody sent me on a damn rabbit hole, and I'll be finding that. So those were just a couple of notes. I knew about the soapstone mold. I'd actually seen that before that had there's actually multiple soapstone molds that have the cross and the hammer in them. But that is what I have.
So I think that's a really good example of sort of what I would argue is the primary theme of all this, which is that the adoption of Christianity was not no matter how it's discussed in the Icelandic sagas, it was not a sudden process, right? I have not heard of a conversion narrative for any culture to Christianity that does not involve an adaptation of sort of Orthodox Christianity,
of the existing current religion. You can't just wholesale switch over it.
And it's a perfect example would be Mexico and the Aztecs, right? You suddenly see these, like, Our Lady of Guadalupe is not a pure representation of the Virgin Mary, right? She has very strong sort of pre-Christian motifs involved in all of that, right? Like, it's not just like, poof, we're Christian, right? It's syncretization. It's that whole process by which.
And that's actually, in a lot of these early depictions from what I've seen, and I literally was just now desperately trying to find an article that I remember reading, and I cannot find it anywhere. This is my life. And was that a lot of the very earliest depictions and ways to talk about Jesus to pagans to get them to convert was the sort of Jesus triumphant, right? Like, so thinking about the Viking ethos of the early medieval Scandinavian, like, you need to be a manly man who wins. You win all the time. And so if you're like told, hey, our God won so hard he got crucified and died. Like, that's not very, like,
it's not very manly.
Right. It doesn't really have the same sort of oomph for the Scandinavians. And so oftentimes you don't see, like, if you see a depiction of Jesus himself, he may be in a cross shape. He's got his arms out, T-posing, but he's not on a cross. If you go look at the Yellingstone, right? So the one that we mentioned earlier from Harold Bluetooth, it says on the Yellingstone, hey, like, Harold Bluetooth, son of Gorm, converted Denmark and all of Norway to Christianity. He only had the southern part of Norway, by the way. It wasn't all of it. He converted everybody, and now we're all Christian. It's great. And on one side of it is this really impressive, crazy knotwork design with a big, kind of scary-looking Jesus.
Yeah.
On the front, and there's no cross. It's just him.
It's just him in the position of
right. And so it's like Jesus triumphant upon returning from the dead. He is now one of the gods. You know, like, right? Like if you're a pagan and you're kind of like trying to bring this into the fold, how would you need to see him?
Yes.
To like make him something you would worship.
So my very favorite example of this is the Highland, which is an old Saxon poem. So it's not Norse, but it's just south of there, the Saxons, right? The Saxons, the Franks, the Saxons, they're converting to Christianity. And in order to encourage this conversion, they write this epic poem of the Gospels, wherein Jesus goes forth and selects his warrior companions. And they go on they really light. Yeah. So Greta mentions the Dream of the Rood. That's another great example, right?
Yep.
So Dream of the Rood is it's what would later become sort of termed muscular Christianity, which is this whole movement from the 19th century and like this masculine Christianity that you have to be like, that anyway, it's a whole thing. My sister is really the one to have talk about that because she knows what she's talking about. But anyway, so the Highland, though, is epic poetry. It is everything that you would expect. It's got the Hull culture. It's got all this kind of stuff. But the main protagonist is Jesus, and he's running around with his magic, which it gets called magic repeatedly, and he performs magic spells, and he's got his warrior companions, and they're off and doing, and you're just like, this is not the gospel I read.
That's not how I remember learning that on Sunday mornings.
If you presented that to me at age like 13 or 14 and been like, read this. This is what you need to read to get your God in Church medal. I would have been like, this is an adventure story. Let's do this. Like, this is a good time. Yeah. So,
but again, that's an example of rewriting the religion, the works of the religion to fit the culture that is converting, right? And it happens again. You can look at the 18th, 19th century missionaries, and yes, they were preaching the gospel, but it was really, they would tailor it to the populace, the local population to get more people on board, because they knew they couldn't just go in and wholesale change it, right? I think that's really what all of this goes down to, is you can't just up and change an entire culture's religion overnight. It doesn't work.
So
unless you're Iceland, in which case you do it.
Well, even then it was still dicey. They put it into law. It didn't mean they were doing it.
But I just wanted to say, so Kenneth, I'm hearing that the Highland there is it's sort of the gospel Viking AU.
Yeah. No, it is straight up Viking. Yes. Exactly. This is the Viking alternate universe Jesus.
Oh my God.
So just really quickly to people out there, if anybody gets on your case for reading fan fiction, just be like, excuse me. We have been writing Jesus fan fiction since at least the 10th century. Like,
no doubt.
Alone, the Renaissance was all fan fiction. It was all fan art.
Huh? Oh,
Fuck
yeah.
off. So there's my permission to you, Facebook land, to tell people fan fiction is fine. You're reading a book. It's a book. Just because it isn't published, wrote it.
What else is Dante? Truly.
What else is Dante?
No doubt.
Insert AU.
Dante is absolutely fanfic.
Insert AU. He Mary Sue's his way through that shit.
Right? Totally does. Oh God, you're killing me.
For more hot takes, come back to us next time on Saga Saturday as we ruin classic lit.
We should do a whole series of let us ruin your favorite stories because we can do that. All right, we are like way over time, but oh my God, this has been so much fun. And do either of you have any last parting words for our lingering guests?
God Yule, Allah. I don't know.
Happy Yule, happy St. Lucia's Day for folks celebrate. Happy Hanukkah,
yes,
by the way.
Yes.
Happy Hanukkah, that's ongoing right now. fantastic holiday with
3,
fire.
what's today? Saturday? Yeah, day 3.
All holidays should involve fire. Just
right.
I guess that's me coming out as Zoroastrian now.
Burn it.
Anyway,
Burn it all.
Happy St. Lucia's Day. Happy everything.
What are we talking about next week?
Next week,
post-conversion.
Post-conversion. So we're still on Yule. Although, we've kind of, this whole Yule pre, during, and post was kind of a loosey-goosey framework to start with, and then we realized we couldn't actually find some of the things we were hoping to find, so we make it up as we go. But yes, next week it is post-conversion, and now that I have found my copy of The Conversion of Scandinavia, that I forgot I owned and is signed by the author, I don't know where I got it from, I will be digging into that more next week, but we'll all be digging into that. So next week, 11 o'clock, we will be here with post-conversion Yule, and then January, so we're going to take the 26th, we are going to take off, and the 2nd as well. But back in January on the 9th, we were going to talk about gender and the whole January is going to be gender norms and bending, all gender all the time in January.
Mm-hmm. Woo!
All right.
It's my birthday month.
Yes, that's why we're doing this. It's all for you. All right, we will talk to everybody next week, and always you can rewatch the recordings if you missed it. You can rewatch it here. They get posted on YouTube, and you can also always message us, and we will happily blather on and on about sagas all day long. So,
as has been demonstrated.
right, no doubt. Bye, everybody.